How many times have you felt completely drained even after a full night's sleep? You may eat right, train well, but still feel something's off. Well, that something might be your HRV. If you fail to improve your HRV, you're putting yourself at a higher risk for a cardiovascular disease. But if you improve your HRV, you can enjoy a higher quality of life right now, but also in the long term. My name is Jonas, and as a sports scientist, I help entrepreneurs improve and optimize their health. And in today's video, we are going to look at what HRV even is and means, how we can improve it, and also I'm going to give you a concrete action plan to improve your HRV right now, but also in the long term. Let's dive into it. Well, HRV, what does that term even mean? HRV stands for heart rate variability. And what that means is, we see this right now down here. We have, of course, and hopefully heartbeats, but those heartbeats don't take place always at the same distance and in the same rhythm. There is a certain variability to it. And we see this, for example, right here. We have distances between where the heartbeats take place, and those distances vary a lot. So if we take this example right here, we see if we have a high heart rate variability, this means that our heart rates take place at a high variability. Pretty self-explanatory, right? But if we have a low heart rate variability, this means that our heart beats at a pretty exact rhythm. And there is a direct correlation between HRV and our health. And we see this in a study where they looked at a set population and they analyzed certain risk factors and how the HRV looked like. So if we take an example right here, we see that, for example, if we have diabetes, then, or a higher percentage of diabetes or chance for having diabetes, we see that those people have a lower HRV. And the same goes for hypertension. The higher our hypertension, meaning our blood pressure, is, the lower our HRV is. And here, for example, as well, the higher our triglycerides in our blood are. Triglycerides is another name for fatty acids, or roughly spoken fats, the lower our HRV is. Same goes for cigarettes here. The more cigarettes we smoke, the lower our HRV is. And we see this again and again. So what we can clearly see is the correlation between low HRV and low health. And it gets even worse, or more drastically. If we look at here, SDNN is another parameter for our HRV. If our HRV or SDNN is low, we are at a 76% higher chance of having atherosclerosis, which stands for damaging or damaged vessels due to calcification and fats which are stored at the interior of our arterial wall. So we can clearly see here that a low HRV equals a low quality of health. And also, if we look at here, SDNN again is a parameter for HRV. If that parameter here is below 50, people who had a myocardial infarct 30 years after that are 40% less likely to survive. So again here, low HRV equals a higher risk of death. So we see the direct impact our HRV can have on us and our health. So now the question then becomes, if you know what our HRV is and what it stands for, how can we then improve it? That's what we are going to look at right now. So if we want to improve our HRV, we want to look at the factors that impact our HRV. And we see this very clearly right here. We have three main categories, and I'm going to display you the factors which we can control the most and therefore can improve the most on our own. So we have here the depth of our breath, blood pressure, body temperature, hormones, and also disease and sickness. Then we have our circadian rhythm, our nutritional intake, what we consume and enjoy eating, or also, for example, cigarettes. Then medication, stress, mental tension, and physical activity. Also, another category that has a lot of impact on our HRV is our age, our gender, how much body fat we have, how much we weigh, what our fitness looks like. And those are all the factors which have an impact on our HRV. So let's look at 7 parameters or factors that impact our HRV and how we can improve them. So if we have, for example, low fitness, well, the answer there is pretty simple. We want to train right. How can we train right? We want to integrate aerobic exercise into training, also strength training, to just make sure our overall quality of health improves. Then overweight. There we want to plan in, for example, a recomposition phase, meaning that we want to reduce the fat we have in our body and increase our muscle mass. Chronic stress, well, there are a multitude of factors how we can resolve this. One might be to just set boundaries and put aside more time for ourselves, so-called me time. Then another one would be a mental coaching, just to deal with the stress or cope with the stress better, or also try meditation or breathing exercises. Then mental tension. Here there are the same things we can apply to mental tension. Also, what we can try is so-called NSDR protocols. This stands for non-sleep deep rest, meaning it's a kind of meditation, but it's slightly different. You can Google those are free on YouTube to be listened to, and I can really recommend them to you. And also, what is very beneficial to release and relieve mental tension is yoga nidra, which is similar to NSDR. Then circadian rhythm. How can we improve this? Well, we want to have a good sleep hygiene. Then if we know how to have a good sleep hygiene and how we can control our internal clock or body clock, we can then improve our circadian rhythm. There things go into like see sunlight first things first in the morning, avoid caffeine after 2 p.m., eat your last meal 2 hours before going to bed, avoid blue light in the evening, maybe integrate physical activity in the morning to help improve and adapt your circadian rhythm. So you see there are a lot of things which you can do to increase and improve your circadian rhythm. Blood pressure. There a good intervention is, and I talked about this in previous videos, is to include aerobic exercise into your weekly routine. Why? Because if we exercise aerobically, then we lower our blood pressure, and if we do this regularly, we can sustainably lower our blood pressure instead of taking medication. Sickness here. Well, how can we avoid getting sick? This goes hand in hand with the parameters we looked at before. So we want to reduce overweight, reduce chronic stress, improve our circadian rhythm, and exercise regularly so that we strengthen our immune system. And also, if we get sick, we might try a supplement protocol or nutritional protocol, such as eating curcuma. Also, ingwer is pretty nice to, the English word would be ginger, to improve your speed of recovery. So you see, each parameter here, which has an impact and direct impact on our HRV, can be controlled and improved with concrete interventions, and this is what we want. So also I want to dive into one aspect more specifically, which is breathing. Why does breathing work to increase our HRV? Well, we see this here. If we inhale, we have a lower HRV. If we exhale, we have a higher HRV. And as we saw, a low HRV equals a high risk of death. So if we have a high HRV, we have a low risk of death. And therefore, if we use breathing techniques correctly, we can increase our HRV pretty fast. And this is what we're going to look at in the last part of the video. So how can we then, with concrete measures, improve our HRV? Well, there are two big factors which goes into that. We have one being movement and the other one being breathing techniques. So if we look at movement, or let's say training, how can we train effectively to improve our HRV? Well, there is a study been conducted on people who were overweight, and they did an intervention of 30 minutes of aerobic exercise training for 3 times per week. And it is mentioned here, but I assume heavily that it is moderate intensity. For a total of 12 weeks. And by doing so, we can see here, we have the before and the after picture of their HRV. And what we can clearly see, there is a bigger oscillation going on in the curve. Also, when we look at here, there's a part called, or they looked at the frequency at the individuals who took part in the study, and we see here a low frequency, and here we see a higher activity of higher and low frequencies. Those frequencies stand for the activity of our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and in order to have a low HRV, we want to have a high activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. And this we see clearly here in the frequency, where a high frequency, or there is a high activation of the high frequency. It sounds complex. What you can take away for yourself here from this graph is that if you do aerobic exercise training, you can increase your HRV, and that's exactly what we want. Now the second part is breathing. How can we increase our HRV by breathing? Well, we want to regularly throughout our day breathe slowly. Why? Well, first of all, if we breathe slowly, we tend to breathe deeper. And when we breathe deeper, we breathe deeper into our lungs. And at the bottom of our lungs, there are receptors which activate our parasympathetic nervous system. And that parasympathetic nervous system then helps us or increases our HRV. It's like going on holiday and working. When you work, you have to get up at the same time, produce a set amount of outcome, and then go to sleep and do the same thing over again tomorrow and the day after, and so on for weeks. But when you go on holidays, you can relax, meaning you can wake up at different days of the time, you can go to bed, you can unwind, you have an irregular rhythm, you have variability in your daily schedule, and so you have time to recover. And that way, yeah, it's the same with our HRV. If it is high, it is irregular, and our body has time to recover. And we can trigger this recovery by activating our parasympathetic nervous system. And by breathing slowly, we activate this system. Now, there's a technique called 4-7-8, and you may have heard of it. And it stands for breathing in for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 7 seconds, and breathing out for 8 seconds. If you do this a couple of times throughout the day, you can increase your HRV because you trigger your parasympathetic nervous system. Also, by conducting in a NSDR protocol, you lower your breathing frequency and therefore also activate your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you increase your HRV. That's with breathing. Now, I've brought to you a little extra for this video, and the question is, how does an OURA Ring or an Apple Watch can measure your HRV? Is it exact? Is it useful? The answer is yes, it is useful. No, it is not that exact. What I mean by that is, if we conduct an ECG, meaning if that's just an electrical display of the function of our heart, then we have a very exact outcome and description of our HRV. But if we use an Apple Watch or an OURA Ring, those devices measure our HRV with light. So you may have seen green and red light. Those two colors are there to infiltrate our skin and measure our HRV. And therefore, because it isn't that exact, those devices tend to over-evaluate and over-estimate our HRV. So what I use those devices for is, I use those devices to track the health of my clients, but I'm careful by analyzing or putting my opinion on the exact HRV numbers. But what I do instead is I observe trends to see how the HRV is developing. And there you can very clearly see, if an individual is sick, the HRV goes down. If an individual sleeps bad or less or little, the HRV goes down. And therefore, I can detect trends and adapt their protocol, sleep protocol, nutritional protocol, or training protocol to help my clients and also for myself to increase the HRV. And that's what we all want. So let's look at everything once again. We have looked at what the HRV is and why it is important, and we've clearly seen that a low HRV equals a high risk of death. Then what are parameters that impact our HRV? There are multiples, but in general, It is stress on our body. Okay, how can we then alleviate that stress? Well, we want to strengthen our body. How? With training and giving it more time to relax. For example, by breathing or sleeping better. Those are the key aspects one needs to consider when one wants to improve their health right now and also in the long term. And if you do so, you can and will improve your HRV. That was it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you lots of success by implementing this advice or techniques and methods. And yeah, I wish you a good week and hope to see you next time. Until then, stay healthy. Best wishes, Jonas.